Your dungeon tiles are getting boring. You need to upgrade. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Blackmagic Craft. Today I am going to upgrade, or I guess make an alternative, or no, that's not right. I'm gonna make a cool variant on my basic dungeon tiles. I'm gonna show you how I made these acid etched tiles. They got this kind of gross, gooey, slimy acid stuff going on them. They are probably one of the cooler things I've made recently. I really like them. So anyway, if you already have your basics set, figured out, you got those techniques down, and you want to try something a little bit more advanced and interesting, there's a project for you. Now you might be thinking, but wait, I already saw your video on liquid pools or whatever the hell I called that video. This is similar, but I use a different product to melt the foam that I think works a bit better than the nail polish in that one. And I use a different resin than the stuff I used in that video because I'm done with that Walmart resin. It's problems. Sometimes there's just problems. You can't mix it with paint. So essentially what we're gonna be doing here is taking a couple tutorials, the basic dungeon tiles, water effects one, and also the dissolving pools, and kind of taking all that stuff and putting it together to make a really cool piece for your table. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say thank you to a cool guy named Jimmy who sent me a link to a t-shirt. This friggin' cool t-shirt. He posted on my page. Thought, hey, bet this would be funny if I post this. He'd probably like it. Well, Jimmy, I ordered it because this shirt is sweet. It's my new favorite t-shirt, so thank you. But more importantly, and on a more serious note, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you guys who have supported Blackmagic Craft on Patreon. You guys are awesome. I love you. And this channel is improving at an alarming rate thanks to your help. So before we jump into the tutorial, I got to give praise to these awesome folks. So to make these acid damage tiles, you need to first have a basic tile done up. I've already covered how to make these types of tiles in my basic dungeon tile series. So if you haven't seen that yet, go back and watch that and make up some tiles up to this point, the point at which you would move on to coating them or painting them. And in order to do this etching, you could do it with the clear nail polish like I did on my water tiles videos, but that's not quite aggressive enough to do large areas. I'm finding as I do more, it can get kind of annoying and you only get one chance to do it because the nail polish hardens. So if you want to make it a little bit easier, but a little bit more dangerous to do, I suggest getting some acetone. Now, acetone is the agent in the nail polish or nail polish remover that actually melts the foam, so you're just cutting out all the other stuff and using it pure. You can buy this at any kind of hardware store or painting store. It's usually in the painting section or auto body shops, whatever. It's a pretty common product. I will put a link to some on my web shop just in case you're unsure. And I'm going to leave it up to you guys to read all the safety precautions on this stuff because it is not, you know, the safest thing to work with. I mean, I wouldn't get too worried about it, but it is worth reading the warnings on it. It's flammable, it is poisonous, and you're gonna be melting foam, so you wanna do it in a ventilated area. If you can do this outside, that would be ideal. I would actually do this outside if I wasn't filming it. If you are not an adult, this is a project that you're gonna wanna get an adult for. So Blackmagic Craft takes no responsibility for people melting their faces off with acetone. All right? Okay, good. Now that that's out of the way. So you want to take some of your acetone and put a little bit in a cup. Now, be very careful about what cup you choose because if it is a plastic cup that's made of polypropylene or poly whatever, same stuff that styrofoam is made of, like a plastic drinking cup, it's gonna melt right through the bottom. So use a paper cup, or better yet, a glass container, and just pour out a small amount of this, like maybe half an ounce, to do a couple tiles. Take a crappy paintbrush, and you are basically just going to paint on where you want this acid to have dissolved through the floor. This stuff is aggressive. You don't need too much of it, and you're going to want to start off small. So I want a big kind of section in the middle here, so I'm just going to paint that on and do a little bit of a random shape. You can see I'm brushing it on very lightly, and it is working pretty aggressively. And it's good to brush it on and give it a minute or two to actually act, because sometimes you might put it on and think, oh, it's not melting enough, and then you put more on and then it melts too much. You don't want it melting right through, and if it's too low, that just means that you're going to end up having to use more of the resin later, which, you know, if the less you can use, the better. So let it activate and melt, and take a look to see if there's anywhere where you think it needs to be a little bit more aggressive, and put some more on. And that is the thing that makes the acetone better than the nail polish, is that you can come back and add more melting to the foam. Whereas if this was the nail polish, this whole layer would dry hard and be kind of sealed up and wouldn't melt again unless you did it quick enough. So there's a nice big area there, and I'm just going to add some extra smaller spots to this tile. And keep in mind playability. You know, don't cover up so much of this tile that you can't put minis on it. It's nice to leave areas for them to stand and kind of avoid this acid, you know, give them a path that they can take. And I kind of like adding sections in the middle that a mini can stand on. You know, if they want to jump over and protect themselves surrounded by this acid pit, they can. So just do a few little extra spots until you are happy with what you're doing. Now, I would suggest avoiding the very edges, because if you go too close to the edge, you might end up with something like this, which looks really cool, but when we pour the resin, might be a little tricky because it's going to want to leak out the side. So if you can keep the dissolved areas kind of contained to the inner part of the tile, that is probably best. There, and then you just want to sit and let this activate for a while. Here's one that I did, you know, a few minutes before, and what happens is it actually creates this kind of weird plasticky skin. I don't exactly know what it is, but it's like all the styrofoam that has melted turns into this film and creates a bit of a bubble, and you want to peel that out because you don't want to have a big bubble where, you know, you're going to pour resin on top and then there's a gap that could cause problems later. So just go through and rip this stuff out. It's basically just like a skin, so it comes off pretty easily. I wouldn't worry about getting every little bit of it. Just make sure that you get the big pieces that are covering large voids off, and you should be good to go. The ones that are in these smaller sections, you can even just push them down so that there's no bubble. Let this dry for a little bit and make sure there's no active acetone on there anymore, which doesn't take too long because it evaporates pretty quickly. And you can go ahead and paint these. I tend to now use a coat of Mod Podge and black paint mixed in first, and then paint them as you would any other dungeon tile. But you can avoid painting the insides of these if you want, just leave them black before moving on to the next stage. So we're gonna fast forward until these are painted. Now that my paint job is complete, and if you are unsure as to how I did the paint job, again, check the Basic Dungeon Tiles episode. I kind of went over it there. And if you're really struggling with your paint, stay tuned on the Basics series because I am going to go over the dry brushing techniques and stuff in a little bit more detail there. Essentially, you are going to want to paint this in the same way that you did your basic dungeon tiles. So for me, it was black, coat of dark gray, dry brush of light gray, and then a little bit of a dry brushing of white. And then I gave everything a black wash and left it to dry. But before we move on to the actual acid resin, we need to give these a protective coating of the Minwax polyurethane clear satin spray. And this one is going to match the rest of my tiles. It's going to protect the finish and it's going to give them a slightly wet look that I think brings out the variance in colors and actually makes the paint jobs look better. If you're unsure which stuff to buy, check out my website, blackmagiccraft.ca. There's the web store there, and I have a link to this stuff on Amazon so that you can purchase the correct stuff. But anyway, it's important that you spray this stuff on at this stage. You don't want to pour any type of resin or artificial water and then spray the polyurethane, because the polyurethane has a satin finish, and when it gets on the glossy resin or artificial water, it mutes it and it makes it look kind of crappy. So I'm going to take these outside and give them a spray, and then they're going to have to dry up before moving on to the resin. So now these have been sprayed with the polyurethane, and a tip: if you are using the spray polyurethane and having trouble with it, and you're finding that it is causing some melting on your foam, which it shouldn't be, move your can further away. It seems like every time somebody says they have an issue with it, it's because they're trying to spray from like 2 or 3 inches away. Pull the can up, 7 to 12 inches away and do a bunch of light passes. And you want to let that stuff dry for a few hours before moving on to the next step. For the sake of getting this filming done, I'm rushing it, and these are a little bit tacky still, so it's going to be a little awkward to handle. But if you have more time, let them dry completely. So we'll move this out of the way here, and we're going to mix up some resin. Now, you could, first of all, leave these the way they are. These could just be battle-scarred tiles, and I actually may make a few and just leave them like this because they look pretty cool and interesting on their own. But for this, we want to do some kind of acid on them. You could do them similar to my water effects ones on my cave tiles, where you just paint out these in, kind of green or whatever, and then pour the acrylic water. But I want something where the liquid actually has more of a color to it. And those artificial water kits from Walmart do not mix well with paint. So I want something that I can mix some paint into and, make it have some color. So instead, I am going to be using some 5-minute epoxy. This stuff you can mix with just about anything, and it is not going to have a problem curing, and it's going to cure fast, and it's going to cure hard. This stuff is a pain in the ass to work with because it's so thick, but it works. It works every time without incident. Now, you can thin it with acetone, and I would do that in certain cases, but I don't want to take the risk of some of that acetone eating into this foam and revealing pink. Now, with the Mod Podge and the polyurethane, it shouldn't, but you never know, so I'm going to use it full thickness and just make do. For my Canadian brothers and sisters, this is the exact stuff that I buy, and I buy it from Dollarama. It's $1.50 for one of these tubes, and you can get a lot of water effects out of them. If you can't find this brand, it doesn't really matter. Just get whatever 5-minute epoxy that's a 2-part in a syringe that you can find, and it should work no problem. I'm going to put a link up to some on my web store, but I've looked and I can't find this brand on Amazon, so I'm just gonna look for another one that is cheap for you guys to buy. Open up the epoxy. It usually has a tip that you have to break off. I'm gonna use these little plastic shot glasses from the dollar store to mix here. And I think I might just use this whole tube because I got quite a bit going on here. Now, the more resin that you have in a cup, the faster it is going to cure because it works through a chemical reaction. So when you're mixing a full quantity like this, you have to act quickly. You want to stir it up really, really well. You can see that it kind of goes silver or milky in color for a second, and that the chemical is already starting to work. And you may feel that the cup starts to get warm, which means it's starting to cure. So for this, I'm just going to use this lime green, and I'm going to put a small single drop in and mix that in and see how it looks. I don't want the pigment on this to be too strong. I want it to still look like it's a little bit translucent, so one drop is more than enough. And here, I'm just going to start pouring it into these voids before it cures. Because this is thick, it's a little bit difficult, but be careful not to overfill. A little bit less is probably better so that you can see at least some of the cool texture in these voids. And you have to just let gravity do its job. Now, by the looks of it, one of those tubes of epoxy is probably just enough to do one tile, unless you want to go thinner. But I want these to be kind of full. And you have a couple minutes where you can actually move this around a little bit to make sure that it gets into all the crevices. And you can see here, because I didn't mix that much paint in it, it has this kind of clear section here where it's thinner. And that's kind of why I didn't want to put too much paint in there. And I'm just going to move this around. Get it into all the voids there. Realistically, if some of this spills over onto the edges, it doesn't matter. It'll still look good. But what won't look good is if there's a weird pocket like right here where it hasn't flowed into. That looks a little bit strange, so that's what you want to avoid. Then let this sit for about 5 minutes while it cures. All right, there you have it. 2 acid burn tiles complete. This epoxy has been sitting for, I don't know, about 5 or 6 minutes. Enough for me just to scroll through Facebook for a little bit, and it is cured and hard and not even tacky anymore. Unlike some of the other resins like the water kit from Walmart that you could be waiting 2 days and it never cures. So a couple things to note. This stuff gets really, really, really hot as the chemicals are reacting. So if you touch the tile and you notice it's very warm, that's normal. And when I say really hot, I'm not joking. It's to the point that when these were sitting on my cutting mat, it created a air bubble underneath and these things started lifting. It went away and it's fine, but yeah, the heat from the resin plus maybe the insulating property of the foam on top of the rubber mat created some hilarious results. The other thing that happens with this epoxy as it's curing is that it starts to bubble. That is not great if you're trying to do still water, but for something like this, it's amazing. It only makes the thing look better. And as these bubbles pop, they actually leave the circles. So these are gonna stay like that and look really freaking cool. The one thing that did happen that surprised me, it still worked out fine, but is that I mixed in this lime green, and the epoxy, when I mixed it, was nice and green, but when it cured, it actually turned kind of yellow, which again, for this is great and no problem, but just something to keep note of. I wasn't expecting that to turn that color. I've used this epoxy with other colors and they stayed fairly true during the cure process, so I'm not sure what happened there. But I guess the thing to keep in mind is that when you're working with this stuff, to expect some variance. But that is it, guys. Done. There you have it. That's how you make acid dissolving dungeon tiles. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, hit that like button, drop me a comment below, head on over to the Facebook page, show me what you're working on. And of course, if you're not already a subscriber, come on, get with the program. Hit subscribe. And lastly, if you want to help me help you, the best way you can do that is by supporting Blackmagic Craft on Patreon. It's a great way for you to help me improve this channel. The support allows me to buy new equipment and supplies for tutorials, and more importantly, it allows me to dedicate more of my time to this channel and to you guys. So even a little bit of support on Patreon goes a long way. I will see you again next time. Cheers.